Well, it's been a hot minute since I last talked about Battlestar Galactica, and that's a crime because it should never not be time to talk about BSG, but what to talk about? Well, last time it was a video on the Cylon base star, today it's going to be on the real workhorse of the Cylon Empire, the actually useful part of their empire and the actual threat to the Galactica 90% of the time, the Raider. Which is a dumb name because they don't so much raid as kill everything, but hey, sweet name for a goddarn beautiful ship. Most of the time, I'm a remaster fan for all of their designs, mostly the colonials, but no, just like the base star, the original Raider is peak. This is perfection, you can't make it better. But there are multiple other craft that carry the name Raider and a few other random support craft that have been hanging around in the setting. So today, I figured might be fun to go over all the Raiders we know about, discussing the original as well as the changes made to it in the remaster, the modern Raider, meat monster that it is, as well as some of the other Cylon snubcraft that I feel deserve to at least be mentioned. Before we begin, however, introductions! Welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of sci-fi in all its glory to you, the viewer. I'm Cy, your guide and professional idiot through these trying times. Hopefully entertaining enough to earn a like or subscribe by the end. And with that, let's start with the original Raider, shall we? The first iteration of it. And let me just say again, peak design. This thing is amazing. The flying wing with the edges split open to show the laser housings, the slatted cockpit that sits like a brick dead center, and the way its engines are these massive, bulky things. It's just perfect. In the original, the Cylon Raider served as the sole strike arm of its parent capital ship, the base star. The portrayal of the Raider was also of a frankly ineffective and laughably sluggish ship, despite the fact it was piloted by machines. We see time and time again that Raiders are fought to a standstill by colonial Vipers, even the Mark I, and are often humiliatingly defeated by our heroes, Starbuck and Apollo most of the time. At one point, Apollo even gets it in his big head that he should tempt fate and give life the middle finger by saying he would never lose to Raiders unless they had a 10-1 advantage, and yeah, despite that being a massive red death flag, he does manage to get out of a tight bind like that, and you do see them fight 10-1 odds fairly regularly. The Cylon Raiders we see, most likely due to technical and budget limitations of the time, are rather lumbering heavy fighters that attack in large swarms, using their sheer numbers to put down enough laser fire to overwhelm the colonial Viper pilots who dramatically outmaneuver and outskill them, most of the time. The real danger they pose is a facet of their overwhelming numbers. Despite being consistently outfought, the Raiders are often able to overwhelm and bypass colonial fighter groups, dozens of them tying down the human craft while dozens more simply head off to accomplish whatever goal they had, unbothered by all the friendly casualties happening around and behind them. The most stark example of this is when the Galactica suffers a suicide strike by the Raiders. Initially, a large swarm of them is intercepted by the Galactica's combat air patrol, but to both their surprise and horror, most of the Cylon Raiders just peace out, peel off, and ignore the furball going on to make a run on the Galactica herself, resulting in a hit on the bridge and the injury and death of multiple bridge crew, including Adama himself being heavily injured. Coming equipped with twin laser cannons, the Raider could instantly vaporize other fighter craft or pose a light threat to capital vessels. For doing real damage to the big boys, Raiders also had an internal bomb bay and wing-mounted racks that could drop high explosive weapons out from the underside of the fighter. I mean, at least I think they do. These are called missiles, according to like all the different examples, talking points, and wikis I could find, but I don't think we actually ever see missiles being fired, and I don't think they had an actual component to the model. I think it was along the lines of the Viper's torpedo guns, where they just say that they're firing torpedoes, but it's actually just a bigger energy blast. Propelling the Raider are the massive twin engines on the back that bleed into the shape of the cockpit. It's not super relevant, I just think they're really cool. Though if you want some jargon excuse that I made up, I could say that while they don't grant the Raider the same mobility of the Viper, they do protect the engines far better than the partially covered thrusters we see on colonial ships. The original Cylon Raider is a beautiful design that functions with overwhelming numbers, builds a frankly British level of shoulder-to-shoulder gun line when they're shooting things in space, and it's stylish, cool looking, and while still silly, it's just a fun ship. I even like that it has this pointlessly large crew of 3 that it absolutely doesn't need, and implies that the Raider is absolutely massive, like a hilariously large fighter compared to the Vipers. In its lore, it was even a long-lasting and successful fighter design, having served as the Cylon's main and only small craft for near enough 30 years in universe by the end of the original series. It shall forever hold the title of best Cylon Raider in perpetuity. And, what's that? Holy god damn, son, would you look at this? My god, it's the Advanced Raider, also known as the AB Raider, from the 1980 second season of BSG. It's so futuristic looking, it's so angular, so sharp, so goddamn fugly, it makes my eyes hurt. Did I get you? Did I half convince you that I like the advanced version better? No, this thing is ass. It's awful. It's absolutely terrible. I can only describe this as an obese Raider. All the charm is gone. All the style is gone. The only thing that's really the same is the cockpit. Otherwise, the Advanced Raider is just awful. I mean, looks better going than coming, because the backside's a lot more interesting than the front, but hey, let's just put a bag over that everything else. So, the Advanced Raider is awful. I really don't like its design, and I feel just like the modern Raider that it entirely abandoned everything that makes the original awesome, and replaced it with a weird, inferior, super fat-looking version of it that just doesn't fit. And for the life of me, I cannot see it as anything other than one of those 1,000-degree knives with a cockpit on top. The glowing red line is just, it does something that just makes it even worse for me. We know precious little about this craft as well, other than it was developed to replace the aging original, which, like I said, multiple decades serving by that point was kind of getting outdated. The Advanced Raider is similarly equipped with twin laser cannons, just like the original, but unlike the first version, the Advanced Raider is built like a brick shithouse, able to soak multiple laser blasts from a twin-seater Viper without so much as flinching, and even after being rammed by said Viper, and re-entering Earth's atmosphere, the Advanced Raider still survived and was only too damaged to get back up and fly away, eventually being destroyed when the Cylons activated the self-destruct to prevent its technology from being recovered. It also has a staggeringly stupid 6 crew members. 6 of them. Like, having 3 of them is kind of quaint and kind of funny. You're like, it's too many people, it's too many guys to put in a fighter plane. But 6 of them is just like, what are they even doing? 2 of them are flying the ship, which seems superfluous. They share the center console. 2 are sat at the front managing the weapons and stuff, while 2 more are seated off to the side doing whatever it is they do. I don't know, providing moral support, I guess? All in all, we don't know much about this fighter. Other than some surface level details similar to the original, well, that's pretty much all we got. Battlestar Galactica 1980, bad. Very bad. And it deserved to die. And that brings us to the remastered series, or the remastered timeline, because we're going to be jumping between the actual remastered RDM series, the Blood and Chrome mini-series, the Deadlock video game. We're going to be jumping around a lot in the remastered timeline. Starting out with the analog for the original Raider, the Raider prototype. The prototype is, for all intents and purposes, just a remake of the original design, with a few changes to its gear, technology, and visuals, while keeping most of it the same. Instead of lasers, the Raider prototype is equipped with twin kinetic weapons mounted in the same splits in its wings that the lasers were, and a bank of missiles mounted on the underside of its hull. Similar to what was said about the Raider from the 1978 show, but we actually see them fired during the events of Blood and Chrome, so it's more apparent that they're actually a thing. The prototype Raider is, as its name suggests, the prototype of the platform, and in the remastered lore serves as the first domestically produced Cylon strike craft, most likely created during the time period between the Rebellion and the First Cylon War, as it served as the mainstay small craft during the early war period. The prototype Raider also possesses 4 engines rather than the large 2 that we're used to seeing from the original series. Instead, the engines are clustered into 2 pods of 2. The most notable difference from the original is what it's used for. Instead of acting as the main offensive tool for the Cylons, the Raider is now a multi-role fighter and interceptor similar to the Viper. Its main role is to screen incoming fighters, shoot down missiles, and establish a protective cordon well away from their base ship, allowing the carrier to bombard enemies with shed loads of missiles like the kiting little shits that they are. Only when the enemy is weakened, exposed, or vulnerable is the prototype Raider meant to actually head off and engage them, since its armaments were nerfed from the original and they're not amazing at killing capital ships anymore. Just like the original though, the prototype Raider relies on sheer numbers to overpower their opponent, relying on 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 odds in order to guarantee victory. Their large size makes them easy targets for Colonial Vipers in a fair fight, as the broad and flat wing design makes them a rather clumsy space superiority fighter. And following on from that is something that had me scratching my head quite a bit, since this This doesn't have a lot of info on it, and it's frustratingly similar to the prototype in how it's referred to and talked about, but we get the Raider Prototype Mark II, or as it's officially listed, the Type 2. Honestly, this one is a little bit up in the air, because when we got Battlestar Galactica, the RDM series, there's a section where we're looking in the flight pods, and there's an old Cylon War Raider that's up on display, and it looks like the original. When we got Battlestar Galactica Blood and Chrome, the model for the Raider was named the same, but it wasn't changed from what we see in Deadlock or the original television, not the original, the RDM television series. The most notable changes are that the slits in the wings have been made noticeably smaller than the prototype, and the wing tips have been offset forward slightly, as well as returning the large black twin-engine housings compared to the 4 exposed thrusters on the Type 1. The Type 2 seems like a visual update of the original at first, but on all the wikis, discussions, and official responses I can find, they're treated like 2 different ships. They're very slightly different, and it's easy to mix them up, so I'm going to work off of the assumption that it was intended to be a visual update, but it was referred to as a different ship to avoid confusion and mixing up the 3D models, and eventually they just became its own thing. So along that vein, it looks like the Type 2 was supposed to improve on the design in a number of small but impactful ways, like adding more protection to the engine assemblies and returning to the blocky look of the original, reducing wasted space in the gun mountings and offsetting the wingtips forward because it looks cool. It could also be to more efficiently house the under-chassis missile racks, but that's just a guess, so take it with a grain of salt. Honestly, this is a bit of a strange area to find ourselves in, since I'm really trying to sort out ships in the RDM timeline. Like, everything from Battlestar Galactica, Deadlock, and Blood and Chrome are all canon, but they all have different versions of the same ships, and all the names are the same, but different and not, and it's just, oh, my head hurts so bad. And a great example of this is what we're up to next, which is simply called the Raider. Amazing. Thank you, BSG team. Truly, you are consummate professionals when it comes to naming things. So this is another Deadlock ship, and chronologically, it shows up near the midpoint of the war. There are a number of visual design elements that make me think, while not intentional, that it fits perfectly as the development of the Type 2 and the stepping stone to what would become the modern Raider in the remaster. Boasting far more pronounced and aggressive wingtips formed into these protruding, almost spikes at the front, as well as the near total removal of the split between the wings and center body, and the placement of the guns farther forward, the Raider from Deadlock looks like a midway point between the modern Raider we see, with the stupid Cylon head on it, and the original Raider design. Most of the center body looks the same, barring the slightly smaller and more rounded cockpit, and based on the design capabilities, it seems like this version of the Raider is moving more towards maneuverability and speed over relying on raw numbers and a substandard airframe. Compared to the prototype Raiders, Type 1 and 2, the Raider, this is so confusing, holy Jesus. I changed my mind, mark numbers. The Vipers did this, absolutely painless. I'm just going to do it for the Raiders as well. The original will stay the original. The remastered version of the original is now Type 1. Type 2 we covered, and now this is Type 3, the one from Battlestar Galactica Deadlock. Wonderful, amazing. This is now the Type 3 Raider, so I can separate them out, and now I'm not going to lose my mind saying Raider 500 times. Like I was attempting to say though, the Type 3 is about 20% faster than the Type 1 or 2, sacrificing some armor and hull integrity, while in exchange making it about on par with Colonial fighters. The loss in durability, however, does mean that each individual Raider is now significantly less survivable and notably weaker than their Colonial counterpart, which is questionable. Personally, I don't really like this version of the Raider. I think the wings are way too pronounced, way too solid looking, and the split wing design was what made the original so iconic. It just feels like a waste to abandon that. Granted, it does look like a perfect in-between of what we would eventually end up as, but just like middle children everywhere, it's awkward, average, and easily forgettable. And that brings us to the first version of the Heavy Raider, or the Heavy Type 1, as I shall now refer to it. And I want to say, I really like the idea behind this ship. The Heavy Raider we see in the RDM series is a weird mess, just like the modern Raider is, and we'll get to that, by God we will get to it, but the Deadlock version of the Heavy Raider is pure of purpose, clear of mind, and beautiful in its intent. The Heavy Type 1 was designed and put into service during the later years of the First Cylon War. By this point, the Colonial fleet has long since hardened their computer systems and abandoned networking altogether. As seen in the pinnacle of headbutting your problems to death, the Battlestars. As such, the Cylons' main advantage had been whittled away over time, their electronic warfare capability. They had to get closer for longer, only to get less benefit out of trying to hack colonial ships. So the Heavy Type 1 is an elegant solution to that problem. It's just a giant flying dude bucket, and while it may look similar to the Type 3 Raider, the Heavy Type 1 is actually much larger with a massive under-chassis troop compartment instead of missile bays or additional guns. It carries a hilariously large boarding force of 50 Centurions, and since they operate in paired squadrons similar to Colonial Raptors, one flight of Heavy Raiders can dump 100 Centurions onto a Colonial ship. And considering many of the smaller vessels don't even have that many crew members, much less Marines, this proved to be a valuable way to hijack, infiltrate, or compromise Colonial fleets, as a single compromised ship could open vulnerabilities in a fleet's collective E-war systems. Raptors do a massive number of things in the Colonial fleet, from target painting to boarding actions to boating missiles and guns and cannons into battle, or even just running scouting and electronic interference for their fighters. Heavy Raiders at this point in history seem to be exclusively a response to the Colonials making electronic warfare ineffective. It's really cool, and I really like the purpose of the Heavy Type 1. I even think it's pretty cool to give the obvious difference of having a third engine in the back, though it's still slow as a toaster trying to climb stairs, so what can you really expect from it? And before I move on to the RDM Raider and Heavy Raider, I want to talk about a few more ships in Deadlock that aren't exactly Raiders, but they're cool nonetheless. First up is the War Driver. This is an interesting ship that's more of a gunship than it is a fighter. It's not really meant to engage anything, and it's instead meant to provide electronic warfare and scrambling during dogfights. It hangs around the edges of a furball and dicks with Colonial missiles, and bombards their sensors with junk data to reduce their effectiveness and compromise their missiles tracking. In some cases, they can act like a missile screen, making themselves incredibly vulnerable while they attempt to hack and redirect Colonial missiles back at their launcher like the world's worst game of tennis. Then we've got the Advanced Raider again from the 1980 series. I'm sorry, wait, what? Who wrote this in the script? Okay, well, as it turns out, I thought that we banished this thing to the forever box already, but no, it's back again. This is the Vespid. What is a Vespid? So yeah, this is just a straight up cameo. The Advanced Raider from the terrible 1980s BSG was brought back, or I guess its design was revived to create the Vespid Bomber, a variant of Cylon strike craft that's similar to the Heavy Type 1. Really only did one thing, and that was bombs. Like, it carried a ton of bombs. Like, it carried a shitload of them. Vespids are incredibly slow, incredibly fat, and pretty much entirely unarmed. Don't even have a Cylon with a Glock leaning at the passenger side window to drive by incoming fighters. Its entire purpose in existing is to pull an Imperial Japan circa 1945 and YOLO towards the nearest capital ship to do as much damage as possible. And that brings us to the modern era, or the second Cylon War / genocide of the colonies time period. And all of these ships are god awful. Look, it's not even the meat ship thing anymore, okay? When I made a video on the modern base star, I really got into how awful the ships being made of meat was. I'm not gonna go there again, that's not the problem with it. I like the look of the spindly modern base star, you know? Not anywhere near as much as the absolute unit that the OG was, but yeah, I like the modern one. The Raider being made of meat is like, it's just a thing. I don't like it, but it is what it is. What I despise is how painfully stupid they look, or even worse, how inconsistently stupid they look. The wings themselves don't look terrible. The spiky, over-the-top nature could work really well if you dialed it back a bit and made them look a little more blocky and less smooth to kind of fit the old Cylon aesthetic. The modern Raider always kind of gave me vibes from the Old Republic video game, specifically the Mark VI fighters the Imperials use. A lot of the same design elements are there: rear set cockpit, head, thing that's really big and glows red, engines on the back, thinner wing-like designs coming off the sides and going really far forward. Like, I'm not saying they should have just done this, but going for a more blocky design that feels reminiscent of the older versions would probably have turned out way better. But aside from the blatant downgrade in visuals, what changed in the advance to the modern Raider? Or if we go by the method we used earlier, the Type 4. Well, this one has undergone a near total shift away from the original operating methods of warfare and strategy of Cylon strikecraft. Oh, sure, they still operate in unending swarms thick enough to black out the very stars with their approach, but that's really it. The modern Raider is far more maneuverable than any of the prior vessels, and far faster to boot. The modern Raider is even shown to be a match for Mark 7 Vipers in an ideal engagement, which is a huge step up from how they performed previously. The biggest differences, though, is that the modern Raider is an entirely independent craft, at least when needed to be. Capable of moderate FTL jumps, modern Raiders make up both the mainline fighting force of the Cylons during its era, but also entirely make up the rapid strike and reconnaissance forces. The FTL drive allowing the vast swarms of Raiders to scout massive areas of space around their parent base ship, or to serve as rapid response units, jumping into systems to ambush colonial forces or reinforce friendly units. In multiple cases, we also see them function as strategic strike platforms, boating multiple nuclear-tipped missiles under their wings capable of obliterating colonial civilian ships instantly, or doing massive damage to even colonial battlestars. Put together, the modern Raider is a massive step forward strategically for the Cylons, since it dramatically improves their flexibility, scouting, and strike potential while also keeping their base ships safer than before. The modern Raider is overall a great upgrade to the capacity of the Raider type / class of ship, but my god is it fugly. And that brings us to the last ship to bear the name Raider, the modern Heavy Raider, or Heavy Type 2. Just like the modern Raider, it's unbelievably fugly. Even worse than its smaller brother in my opinion, because not only is the stupid Cylon head stapled like off-center to the side, it's got this weird, wavy parallelogram shape to it that just looks wrong. Personally, I always thought it looked like a really fat, wide fish almost, and I don't like it, but I could just be tripping out here. All the wikis lie about its armament as well, by the way. I checked like 3 different versions of it, and they're all wrong. The Heavy Type 2 comes equipped with what the wiki lies about and says is 2 triple-barrel kinetic weapons. And why is that a lie, you might ask? Because they're not 2 guns. I don't know where this factoid came from, but you can very clearly see 6 guns on the front of the Heavy Raider. They're offset enough that it just looks like you have 2 bricks of 3 cannons. It's like looking at World War II fighter planes like the Spitfire and saying, oh, it only has 2 guns with 4 barrels because, 2 wings with 4 guns in each one, bro, clearly it makes sense, rather than saying it's just got 8 guns. But yes, the Heavy Raider is now equipped with a frankly silly amount of heavy kinetic weapons capable of doing light damage to larger vessels or putting a literal flood of bullets into the path of enemy fighters. Though this is a questionable design change because the Heavy Raider is so much less maneuverable, so much more clumsy even though it's got like 12 thrusters on it, that it genuinely seems like a monumentally stupid design. And conspiracy tinfoil hat theory here, I'm pretty sure the only reason it exists is because when the Cylons had their civil war in the RDM series, they really needed a way to tell apart the good guys from the bad guys. Because if they were all using the same ships, that would have been a friendly fire disaster waiting to happen. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you've made it this far, you're clearly the target audience for this kind of turbo nerd content, so why not leave a like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell, all that stuff to support the channel and get notified when new videos are released. If you're feeling generous, Cy also has a Patreon where you can toss a few dollars at my Staying Alive fund. I would appreciate it. Or if you just want to hang out, we also have a Discord where you can do turbo nerd things with other super geeks. And I stream on Twitch, or I'm planning on streaming on Twitch every Saturday, but maybe more often if it pops off and people actually show up. Everything linked in the video description. Before I nope out of here, a huge thanks to all the generous people supporting the channel so far. The arms dealers providing all the toys and gadgets shown off in today's video. I have like 15 Raiders illegally parked on the street. The food merchants ensuring that starvation is always a faraway issue and not sitting at the front of my mind 24/7. And the coffee merchants fueling my war against sleep. With enough of you, I shall never sleep again. Today a great victory. I only got 3 hours of sleep. And to the new guy, a huge thanks to Milan Zenka. I'm just gonna call you Milan Zenka, like the missile. Thanks very much for buying me a coffee, my guy. And with that, the video's functionally over. I got nothing else to say. Outros are hard. Goodbye!